2,000 years ago, the Roman world teetered on the edge of collapse. Civil wars had torn apart the Republic. Generals fought generals, senators plotted against one another, and ordinary citizens suffered under chaos. The proud traditions of the Republic, its elections, its Senate, its laws, had been shattered beyond repair. And yet, from the wreckage of revolution, a single figure emerged. His name was Gaius Octavius, but history would remember him as Caesar Augustus. The man who transformed Rome from a fractured state into the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Octavian was no obvious savior. Born in 63 BCE to a moderately wealthy family, he grew up sickly and frail, often underestimated. Ancient sources tell us that he had delicate health, a weak voice, and a quiet presence. Few would have imagined that this young man could one day command the loyalty of armies and rule the Mediterranean world. But Octavian's greatest inheritance was not physical strength. It was his bloodline. He was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome. And when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, the young Octavian received the ultimate gift. In Caesar's will, he was named adopted son and heir. It was a dangerous inheritance. Caesar had been struck down by senators who feared his ambition, and Rome plunged again into chaos. Yet Octavian displayed uncanny political instinct. Though only 19 years old, he rallied Caesar's veterans, forged temporary alliances, and moved cautiously, always watching, always calculating. For more than a decade, Rome was racked by civil war. The Senate, the assassins of Caesar, and the generals of his former armies all vied for control. But the struggle narrowed to two figures, Octavian in the west and Mark Antony, Caesar's old lieutenant, in the east. Antony had aligned himself with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemaic pharaohs. Together they commanded immense wealth and influence. To Octavian and his supporters, this was dangerous, not only a military threat, but a cultural one. Antony's ties to Cleopatra were portrayed as a betrayal, a Roman general seduced by an Eastern queen. In 31 BCE, their fleets clashed at the Battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. Octavian's admiral, Marcus Agrippa, deployed superior naval tactics. Cleopatra and Antony's ships broke formation and fled. Their cause disintegrated. Within a year, both Antony and Cleopatra were dead. And Egypt, the richest land in the Mediterranean, was annexed to Rome. Octavian was now unrivaled. He had defeated his last competitors. The Republic's political system was shattered beyond repair. The only question was how Octavian would wield his supreme power. When he returned to Rome, Octavian acted with restraint. He understood what his adoptive fathers had not. Romans feared kingship. Caesar's ambition had brought daggers to his chest. Octavian would not make the same mistake. In 27 BCE, the Senate bestowed upon him a new title, Augustus, meaning the revered one. Officially, the Republic was restored. The Senate still met, magistrates were elected, laws were passed. But the reality was very different. Augustus commanded the legions, controlled the treasury, and held tribunician powers that allowed him to veto or propose legislation at will. Rome had not returned to the Republic. Rome had gained its first emperor. Augustus was not content to rule by force alone. He knew that power must be made legitimate, even sacred. He carefully shaped his image through propaganda, religion, and art. Coins bore his likeness, young, vigorous, and serene. Statues across the empire portrayed him not as an aging man, but as eternally youthful, linked with Apollo, the god of harmony and order. On the battlefield, reliefs showed him in military armor, the commander of Rome's armies. In temples, he appeared in priestly robes as Pontifex Maximus, High Priest of Rome. Literature, too, served his vision. The poet Virgil composed the Aeneid, a national epic that traced Rome's origins to the Trojan hero Aeneas, chosen by the gods to found a city destined for greatness. In the story, Augustus himself was foreshadowed, the culmination of Rome's divine destiny. Stone reinforced the message. The Ara Parsis, or Altar of Peace, displayed images of Augustus's family in procession, linking imperial rule to traditional Roman religion and family values. His Forum of Augustus, lined with statues of great men from Rome's past, cast Augustus as heir to centuries of glory. It was propaganda, yes, but it was also genius. Romans saw in Augustus not a tyrant, but a benefactor, a man who had restored order after generations of bloodshed. Augustus's reign inaugurated the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. For the first time in living memory, Romans knew stability. Civil wars ceased, borders were secured, trade flourished. The empire stretched from Spain to Syria, from Gaul to Egypt. Goods poured into Rome, silks from China, spices from Arabia, glass from Syria, wine from Gaul. The Mediterranean, once a patchwork of rival kingdoms, became what the Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. At home, Augustus poured wealth into the city. He boasted that he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples, forums, aqueducts, and theatres rose in gleaming stone. The capital became a monument to his reign. But Augustus's vision extended beyond architecture. He reformed the military, establishing a standing army of professional soldiers who swore loyalty not to individual generals, but to the emperor himself. Retired veterans were settled in colonies, ensuring their continued loyalty and spreading Roman culture across the provinces. He created the Praetorian Guard, an elite corps stationed in Rome to protect the emperor. Ironically, in centuries to come, they would play kingmaker and executioner. Augustus also reformed society itself. Disturbed by what he saw as the moral decay of the Republic, he passed laws promoting marriage and punishing adultery. Even his own family was not spared. His daughter Julia, accused of scandalous affairs, was exiled. He sought to revive ancient religion, restoring priesthoods and building new temples. As Pontifex Maximus, Augustus presented himself as the guardian of Rome's moral and spiritual health. He also reformed the provinces, instituting regular censuses and tax reforms that stabilized imperial finances. Governors were held accountable to him, curbing corruption. Inscriptions across the empire, in Gaul, in Asia Minor, in North Africa, record his deeds, his generosity, and his gifts to the people. What was it like to live under Augustus? In Rome itself, a city of nearly 1 million people, daily life was transformed. Fresh water flowed through new aqueducts, a police force patrolled the streets, fire brigades were organized to fight blazes in the crowded tenements. For the common people, bread and circuses became central. Grain from Egypt was distributed to feed the urban masses. Vast arenas entertained them with chariot races, gladiatorial combat, and public spectacles. For many Romans, the emperor's greatest gift was not marble monuments, but a full stomach and dazzling entertainment. Yet even Augustus could not solve the greatest problem of empire, succession. His trusted general Agrippa, who had won Actium, was long considered the heir. But Agrippa died suddenly. Augustus then looked to Agrippa's sons, Gaius and Lucius, whom he adopted as heirs. But fate was cruel. Both died young, leaving Augustus bereft of options. His daughter Julia's scandal only deepened the crisis. The imperial family, meant to embody Roman virtue, seemed cursed. In the end, Augustus turned to his stepson Tiberius, the son of his wife, Livia. Capable but cold, Tiberius was not Augustus's first choice, yet he was the only choice left. Livia herself became a figure of rumor. Later historians suggested she had cleared rivals through poison to secure her son's succession. True or not, it revealed how Romans viewed imperial power: fragile, suspicious, and often bloody. Not all was peaceful. In 9 CEE, disaster struck in the Teutoburg forest when 3 Roman legions were ambushed and annihilated by Germanic tribes under Arminius, a former Roman ally. The loss stunned Rome. Ancient writers tell us that Augustus wandered his palace in grief, crying, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." The defeat ended Rome's expansion into Germany. From then on, the Rhine became the empire's northern frontier. It was a sobering reminder that Rome, though mighty, was not invincible. By the time Augustus died in 14 CE, he had ruled for more than 4 decades, longer than any Roman before him. His achievements were inscribed in the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, the deeds of the divine Augustus, set up on monuments across the empire. In it, Augustus presented his reign as a gift. He gave peace, he gave justice, he gave Rome back to itself. The reality was more complex. Augustus had been ruthless, eliminating rivals, manipulating politics, and cloaking monarchy in republican dress. Yet his achievement was undeniable. He forged a system that would endure for centuries. At his funeral, Romans filled the streets. His body was laid to rest in his massive mausoleum on the banks of the Tiber. The Senate declared him a god, Divus Augustus. The frail youth who had once been underestimated was now immortalized as Rome's savior. Rome had lost its first emperor, but the empire he created would endure for nearly 5 centuries in the West and far longer in the East. His successors would inherit both his glory and his burdens. The age of Augustus had been one of restoration, peace, and prosperity. But Rome's greatest strength, the concentration of power in one man's hands, would also prove its most dangerous weakness. Up next, the dynasty of Augustus, the Julio-Claudians, and the fiery reigns of emperors from Tiberius to Nero. In the year 14 CE, Rome mourned the death of Augustus. For over 40 years, he had ruled with a steady hand, bringing peace to a world weary of civil war. But Augustus left behind no son to inherit his power. Instead, his stepson, the reluctant Tiberius, became emperor. Rome was about to discover the challenges of monarchy without the name. For though Augustus had cloaked his rule in tradition and moderation, his successors would reveal just how fragile the balance of power could be. Tiberius was no stranger to command. As a general, he had pushed Rome's frontiers deep into Germania and secured victories in the Balkans. Soldiers respected him for his discipline, though many feared his stern demeanor. But as emperor, Tiberius was uncomfortable. He had never wanted the throne, and his rule began under the long shadow of Augustus. The Senate, accustomed to Augustus's charm, bristled under Tiberius's coldness. He lacked the skill or the patience to flatter Rome's elites. At first, Rome prospered. The treasury was full, the borders safe. Yet rumors dogged the emperor. The sudden death of his nephew and heir, Germanicus, beloved by the army, fueled suspicion. Was it illness or poison? Many believed Tiberius and his ally, the Praetorian prefect Sejanus, were behind it. As the years passed, paranoia deepened. Trials for Maestus, treason multiplied. Senators accused one another of plots. Families were destroyed overnight. Informers thrived in the climate of fear. Eventually, Tiberius abandoned Rome altogether, retreating to the island of Capri, where he built luxurious villas overlooking the sea. There, surrounded by astrologers and guards, he ruled in absentia. Sejanus grew in power, plotting to secure the throne for himself. But in 31 CE, Tiberius struck back. Sejanus was suddenly arrested, executed, and his allies purged in a frenzy of bloodletting. Rome had become a city of whispers and suspicion. By the time Tiberius died in 37 CE, smothered, some claimed, by his own guards, Rome breathed a sigh of relief. After the fall of Sejanus, the emperor's paranoia had only deepened. Senators lived in terror of sudden accusations. Noble families were ruined overnight, and the city had grown accustomed to purges and show trials. The empire remained stable, the frontiers secure. But at home, fear had become a way of life. His death was greeted not with mourning, but with celebration. For to many Romans, the long, joyless reign of Tiberius had been a prison, and at last the gates had opened. Into this weary world stepped Gaius Caesar Germanicus, known by the affectionate nickname Caligula. Little Boots, the son of Germanicus, he was adored by soldiers and people alike. When he became emperor at just 25, the city rejoiced. Statues were raised, sacrifices offered. At last, Rome had a Caesar's blood on the throne. At first, Caligula lived up to the hopes. He lowered taxes, recalled exiles, and lavished gifts on the people. For a brief, dazzling moment, Rome felt renewed. But then, something shifted. Whether through illness or ambition unmasked, Caligula's behavior veered toward the bizarre. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god. He appeared in public dressed as Hercules or Mercury, parading in golden armor. He commissioned temples to himself and insisted that even the most sacred rites honor his genius. He humiliated the Senate, forcing senators to grovel at his feet or dine with him while he mocked their weakness. He emptied the treasury with spectacles of unimaginable extravagance, games, chariot races, and endless gladiatorial shows. Caligula's most infamous stunts became legend. He ordered his soldiers to march to the English Channel and collect seashells as spoils of war against the god Neptune. He built a floating bridge of ships across the Bay of Naples and rode his horse across it to display his power. He adored his horse, Incitatus, housing it in marble stables, feeding it oats mixed with gold, and threatening to make it consul of Rome. But beneath the absurdity lay terror. Caligula delighted in cruelty. He ordered executions on a whim, reveled in humiliating noble families, and flaunted his absolute power. Rome had entered the age of tyranny. After just 4 years, conspirators struck. In January 41 CE, in a palace corridor, members of his own Praetorian Guard plunged their swords into him. Caligula collapsed in a pool of blood, just 28 years old. Rome had learned a grim truth. Emperors could die as swiftly as they rose. In the chaos following Caligula's assassination, the Senate debated restoring the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard acted first. In the palace, they discovered Claudius, Caligula's uncle, trembling behind a curtain. Dragged before the soldiers, Claudius expected death. Instead, he was proclaimed emperor. At first glance, Claudius seemed laughable. Afflicted by a limp, a stammer, and awkward mannerisms, he had been sidelined for years. But behind the odd exterior lay intelligence. A scholar of history, a lover of law, Claudius had the mind of a bureaucrat. And that, Rome soon discovered, was exactly what the empire needed. Claudius expanded the empire, launching the invasion of Britain in 43 CE. For Rome, Britain was a land of tin, grain, and mystery. Its conquest was celebrated in triumph, and Roman rule would endure there for nearly 4 centuries. He improved Rome's infrastructure, building new aqueducts, expanding the port of Ostia, and ensuring the city's grain supply. He reorganized the bureaucracy, elevating freedmen into positions of real power. Names like Narcissus and Pallas became notorious, wielding influence on the emperor's behalf. Senators sneered, but Claudius valued efficiency over aristocratic pride. Yet his private life was stormy. His wife Messalina was infamous for debauchery and intrigue, eventually executed for conspiring against him. His next wife, Agrippina the Younger, was far more dangerous. Brilliant and ambitious, she maneuvered to place her son, Nero, as Claudius's heir. In 54 CE, Claudius died suddenly. Poisoned mushrooms, many believed, served by Agrippina. Rome's future now belonged to a teenage boy. At just 16, Nero ascended the throne. At first, the empire was guided by capable hands, his tutor Seneca, and the prefect Burrus. The young emperor was generous, reducing taxes, pardoning prisoners, and staging games for the people. But Nero's passions lay elsewhere. He longed to be an artist, a singer, an actor. He performed poetry in public, scandalizing Rome's elite. Senators sat in forced admiration as their emperor strummed the lyre. To Nero, power was theater, and he was the star. His relationship with his mother, Agrippina, soon soured. Once his greatest supporter, she threatened his independence. Nero ordered her murdered, first attempting staged accidents, then finally dispatching assassins. Even Rome, hardened by violence, was shocked. Then came catastrophe. In 64 CE, fire ripped through Rome, destroying entire districts. Ancient sources whisper that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Though this is myth, fiddles did not yet exist. What is certain is that Nero seized the devastation as opportunity. He cleared vast swathes of land to build his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace of gardens, lakes, and gold-leafed halls. To shift blame, he targeted the Christians. Persecutions followed, believers crucified, torn apart by dogs, or set ablaze to light Nero's gardens at night. The cruelty shocked even his contemporaries. But Nero's problems went beyond the capital. Revolts erupted across the empire. In Britain, Boudica, queen of the Iceni, led a furious uprising that burned Roman cities before being crushed. In Judea, rebellion broke out, leading to war. In 65 CE, the Pisonian conspiracy, a plot involving senators and even Nero's tutor Seneca, sought to overthrow him. It failed, but revealed how despised Nero had become. Executions followed in waves. By 68 CE, rebellion had spread. In Gaul, the governor Vindex rose against him. In Spain, Galba declared himself emperor. The legions in the east and along the Rhine weighed their own choices. The Senate abandoned Nero, and even the Praetorian Guard deserted him. Alone, he fled the city. On June 9th, 68 CE, facing capture, he drove a dagger into his throat. His final words, "Qualis artifex pereo?" What an artist dies in me. From Augustus to Nero, Rome had endured nearly a century of imperial rule. The dynasty had given the empire triumph and terror alike. Augustus built its foundations. Tiberius preserved it with suspicion. Caligula mocked it with madness. Claudius strengthened it with conquest and bureaucracy. And Nero, with fire, art, and blood, dragged it to the brink of collapse. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. For the first time, Rome faced a world without an heir of Augustus. The throne was empty, the empire unstable, and civil war loomed. The year ahead would be known as the Year of the Four Emperors, when Rome's legions and generals battled for control. In the smoke of that struggle, a new dynasty would rise. The Flavians. The death of Nero in 68 CE ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. For the first time in more than a century, Rome had no clear heir. The imperial throne, the seat Augustus had created, was suddenly up for grabs. What followed was one of the most turbulent years in Roman history. The Year of the Four Emperors. First came Galba, governor of Spain. At 70 years old, he was stern, frugal, and austere. A man who carried himself as if Rome's moral decline could be reversed by sheer will. The Senate supported him, eager to bury Nero's memory. But Galba made a fatal error. The Praetorian Guard, who had helped secure his power, expected lavish rewards. When he refused, insisting discipline must be restored, their loyalty dissolved. 7 months after seizing power, Galba was dragged from his litter in the Forum, his head struck off and paraded on a spear. His successor, Otho, was once a companion of Nero and husband to the infamous Poppaea Sabina. Clever and ambitious, he courted the Praetorians with gifts and promises, styling himself a restorer of peace. But even as he secured the capital, trouble brewed to the north. In Germany, the legions had acclaimed their own general, Vitellius, as emperor. The rival armies clashed at Bedriacum in northern Italy. Otho's forces were defeated. Refusing to plunge Rome into endless civil war, Otho chose suicide. His final words to his friends were simple. "It is far more just to perish one for all than many for one." Even enemies praised his dignity in death. Vitellius entered Rome as victor, but his reign was marked by gluttony and excess. Ancient writers record feasts that lasted day and night, and the empire's treasury strained under his indulgence. Meanwhile, in the east, another contender rose, Vespasian, commander of Roman forces in Judea. Proclaimed emperor by his troops, he secured the vital grain supply of Egypt and gained recognition from the legions in the Danube. As his armies advanced on Rome, Vitellius's support collapsed. Dragged from hiding, he was slain by soldiers in December of 69 CE. Civil war had ended. Out of chaos, stability returned. The empire had found a new dynasty, the Flavians. Vespasian was everything Nero had not been. Born in a modest Italian town, the son of a tax collector, he was the first emperor without patrician blood. A soldier by profession, blunt in manner, practical in outlook, he was as frugal as Nero had been extravagant. The empire he inherited was near bankruptcy. Nero's golden house had drained the treasury, and civil wars had emptied the coffers. Vespasian acted decisively. He imposed new taxes, even on public toilets, provoking mockery until he held up a coin and remarked, "Pecunia non olet," money does not stink. His fiscal reforms restored Rome's solvency and set an example of pragmatism. But Vespasian understood the need for more than austerity. Rome required a symbol of renewal. He began construction of the Flavian Amphitheatre, today known as the Colosseum. Built on the site of Nero's private lake, it was a deliberate act of propaganda. Where Nero had claimed space for himself, Vespasian returned it to the people. Seating up to 50,000 spectators, the Colosseum became the beating heart of Rome, a place where emperors could demonstrate their generosity and bind the masses to their rule. Meanwhile, Vespasian entrusted his son Titus with completing the war in Judea. After a brutal siege in 70 CE, Jerusalem fell. The Second Temple, centerpiece of Jewish worship, was destroyed. The spoils of the temple were carried back to Rome, paraded in Titus's triumph, and immortalized on the Arch of Titus. For the Jews, it was devastation. For Rome, a display of imperial might. Vespasian ruled for 10 years. He restored discipline to the army, rebuilt the finances of the empire, and secured its borders. His humor remained earthy and unpretentious. On his deathbed, as illness overcame him, he is said to have joked, "Oh dear, I think I am becoming a god." Titus, already a hero for his victory in Judea, ascended the throne with mixed expectations. Some feared he would be another Nero, extravagant, corrupt, devoted to spectacle. But those fears quickly dissolved. Titus proved generous and kind, winning admiration as one of Rome's most beloved emperors. He completed the Colosseum, opening it with 100 days of games. Gladiators fought, exotic beasts from across the empire were displayed, and the people reveled in Rome's grandeur. Yet his short reign was scarred by disaster. In 79 CE, only months after his accession, Mount Vesuvius erupted. Towns like Pompeii and Herculaneum were obliterated under ash and pyroclastic flow. The eyewitness letters of Pliny the Younger describe clouds like pines, fire raining from the sky, seas retreating as if pushed back by some force. Tens of thousands perished. Titus responded with compassion. He organized relief, sent money, and opened his palace to refugees. His reputation soared, but tragedy struck again the following year. A great fire devastated Rome itself. Again, Titus opened the treasury for reconstruction, personally supervising relief efforts. Despite his popularity, his reign was brief. In 81 CE, after only 2 years, he died suddenly of fever. His final words were haunting. "I have made but one mistake." What that mistake was remains a mystery. The throne now passed to Titus's younger brother, Domitian. Ambitious, authoritarian, and deeply suspicious, he would rule for 15 years, longer than either of his Flavian predecessors. Domitian saw himself as a new Augustus. He centralized power, demanded obedience, and even styled himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. To the Senate, this arrogance was intolerable. To the army and the common people, he appeared strong and decisive. Militarily, Domitian reinforced Rome's frontiers. He campaigned against the Chatti in Germany, built new roads and forts, and raised salaries for soldiers. He fought costly wars in Dacia against King Decebalus. Wars that drained the treasury, but reinforced his military reputation. Domitian also embarked on grand building projects. He restored the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, expanded the imperial palace on the Palatine, and completed monuments begun by his predecessors. His Rome gleamed with marble and triumphal arches. But paranoia poisoned his reign. Treason trials multiplied, and senators were executed or exiled on suspicion of conspiracy. Informers thrived. Fear gripped Rome's elites while ordinary citizens enjoyed games, festivals, and secure grain supplies. To the people, Domitian was stern, but reliable. To the Senate, he was a tyrant. In 96 CE, conspirators within his own household struck him down. The Senate celebrated, damning his memory, ordering his statues torn down and his name erased from inscriptions. Yet many citizens mourned, for despite his cruelty, Domitian had provided order. The Flavians had risen from chaos to restore stability. Vespasian had rebuilt Rome's finances and gifted the city its greatest monument. Titus had embodied compassion amid catastrophe. Though fate cut his reign short, Domitian had ruled with an iron fist, hated by elites but respected by the masses. Their dynasty lasted less than 3 decades, but their impact was profound. They demonstrated that the empire could survive dynastic collapse and emerge stronger. They ruled not through inherited prestige, but through competence, discipline, and sheer force. When Domitian fell, Rome stood at a crossroads. But rather than chaos, the Senate and army agreed on a successor, a seasoned statesman named Nerva. With him began a new principle. Emperors would be chosen by adoption and merit, not birth. This would usher in the greatest era of all. The age of the 5 good emperors, when Rome reached the very pinnacle of its power and prosperity. With the assassination of Domitian in 96 CE, Rome stood at a crossroads. For nearly 30 years, the Flavians had ruled by force, stabilizing the empire after chaos. But Domitian's paranoia had left scars on the Senate and aristocracy. Rome needed a new kind of ruler. One who could govern with balance, moderation, and wisdom. The Senate turned to an elder statesman, Marcus Cocceius Nerva. His appointment would begin an extraordinary century. Nerva was already in his 60s when he donned the purple. A respected senator and jurist, he had served several emperors faithfully, but had never commanded an army. His reign promised a gentler hand after Domitian's iron grip. He moved quickly to heal old wounds. Treason trials were abolished, exiles were recalled, and confiscated estates were returned. The Senate, once terrorized, now breathed more freely. But Nerva soon faced a crisis. The Praetorian Guard, furious at Domitian's murder, mutinied. They stormed the palace and held the emperor hostage until he surrendered the men who had plotted Domitian's death. The frail old ruler had been humiliated, his weakness exposed. Nerva realized Rome needed a leader who could command the loyalty of the legions. In a master stroke, he adopted Trajan, the popular governor of Upper Germany. With this decision, Nerva set a precedent that would shape the next century. Emperors chosen not by blood, but by merit. When Nerva died in 98 CE, the empire passed seamlessly to Trajan. And with him, Rome entered its greatest age of expansion. Trajan embodied the Roman ideal: disciplined, just, approachable, and above all, a soldier. He spent little time in Rome, preferring to be with his troops on campaign. His most famous wars were in Dacia, the rugged land north of the Danube. Twice he marched across the great river, constructing massive stone bridges to supply his armies. In bloody battles, he defeated King Decebalus and annexed Dacia as a province. The conquest brought immense wealth, especially gold mines, swelling Rome's treasury. In celebration, Rome erected Trajan's Column, a towering spiral of carved reliefs. Its scenes depict soldiers building bridges, storming fortresses, and marching in disciplined ranks. Even today, one can follow the story of Trajan's victories, winding upward in stone. A triumph etched forever in the city's heart. Trajan also expanded eastward, conquering Nabatea and briefly pushing into Mesopotamia. Though some of these territories were later abandoned, they demonstrated the reach of Roman ambition. But Trajan was not only a conqueror. In Rome, he built the Forum of Trajan, the largest complex the city had ever seen, with vast markets, libraries, and public squares. His generosity extended to the poor through the alimenta, a welfare system providing grain and support for children. So great was his reputation that later emperors were measured by him. Senators prayed that every ruler might be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. In 117 CE, while returning from campaign, Trajan fell ill and died. On his deathbed, he named his adopted heir Hadrian. Hadrian was a man of culture, philosophy, and vision. Unlike Trajan, he sought not conquest, but consolidation. Recognizing the empire's limits, he withdrew from overextended territories in Mesopotamia, preferring secure borders to fleeting glory. His reign is immortalized in stone. In Britain, he ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall, stretching 73 miles across the northern frontier. More than a barrier, it symbolized Rome's determination to define and defend its limits. Soldiers patrolled its forts, while trade and diplomacy filtered through its gates. Hadrian was also a tireless traveler. He journeyed to almost every province, inspecting legions, judging disputes, and commissioning new cities. In Athens, he promoted Greek culture, completing the great temple of Olympian Zeus. He walked the streets as a citizen of the empire, not a distant monarch. Yet his personal life was marked by sorrow. In Egypt, his beloved companion Antinous drowned mysteriously in the Nile. Stricken with grief, Hadrian deified him, establishing the cult of Antinous. Statues of the youth spread from Britain to the Levant, an intimate reminder of the emperor's humanity. Back in Rome, Hadrian rebuilt the Pantheon, crowning it with a dome so vast and perfect that it remains one of the marvels of architecture. His villa at Tivoli displayed his eclectic tastes, Egyptian motifs beside Greek theatres, a miniature world of art and culture. When Hadrian died in 138 CE, he left an empire strong, secure, and adorned with wonders. His heir was Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius ruled for 23 years, one of the longest and most peaceful reigns in Roman history. Unlike his predecessors, he led no great campaigns, and rarely left Italy. But his quiet reign was no less significant. He strengthened the empire through law and administration. Legal reforms standardized justice, extending protections to slaves and provincials. Taxes were managed fairly, and corruption curbed. His governance was marked by patience and mercy. He was known for pardoning conspirators and sparing opponents. Rome flourished in this stability. Trade thrived, cities expanded, and prosperity spread across provinces. Temples rose, forums bustled, and Roman citizenship was a prized possession. Antoninus Pius' calm reign might seem uneventful, but it was a rare gift. 4 decades without civil war or crisis. By the time of his death in 161 CE, the empire was wealthy, orderly, and at peace. He had already secured succession by adopting Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was unlike any emperor before him. A Stoic philosopher, he believed in duty, self-control, and the pursuit of virtue. His private reflections, known today as the Meditations, reveal a man struggling to balance the burdens of power with the ideals of wisdom. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." But his reign was anything but peaceful. Along the Danube frontier, Germanic tribes pressed hard. Marcus spent much of his rule in military camps, enduring bitter winters and leading his legions personally. Reliefs on the column of Marcus Aurelius depict these wars: soldiers trudging through forests, captives begging for mercy, emperors offering sacrifice to the gods. At the same time, a devastating plague, likely smallpox, swept through the empire. It killed millions, including soldiers, farmers, and city dwellers. Entire regions were depopulated, and the economy suffered. Despite this, Marcus governed with integrity. He shared power with his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, and later with his son Commodus. He upheld justice, maintained discipline, and sought always to embody the Stoic virtues he admired. In 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius died on campaign in the northern provinces. Soldiers and citizens alike mourned him, for in him Rome had seen the rarest figure, a philosopher who ruled as a king. For nearly a century, Rome had been guided by emperors chosen not by birth, but by adoption and merit. Nerva had set the precedent of selection. Trajan had brought conquest and glory. Hadrian had built and travelled, securing the empire's limits. Antoninus Pius had preserved peace. Marcus Aurelius had embodied wisdom amid hardship. This was Rome at its zenith. Roads tied provinces together. Aqueducts carried water to great cities, and Roman law bound diverse peoples under one system of justice. From Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Euphrates, the empire flourished. Later historians, including Edward Gibbon, would call this the happiest and most prosperous period of human history. Rome seemed eternal, and yet cracks had begun to form. For Marcus Aurelius had broken with tradition. Instead of adopting a capable heir, he passed the throne to his biological son, Commodus, and with Commodus, the Golden Age would end. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, Rome mourned the passing of its philosopher king. For nearly a century, the empire had flourished under wise rulers chosen for merit. But Marcus made a fateful choice. Instead of adopting a proven heir, he passed power to his biological son, Commodus. This decision marked the end of Rome's Golden Age, and the beginning of crisis. At first, optimism filled the empire. Commodus was young, healthy, and the son of a beloved emperor. But soon his reign became synonymous with excess, eccentricity, and violence. Commodus abandoned his father's wars along the Danube, declaring peace so he could return to Rome's luxuries. He reveled in the capital's spectacles, pouring money into games that drained the treasury. Ancient historians paint him as obsessed with his image. Commodus styled himself as Hercules reborn, posing in lion skins, wielding a club, and commissioning statues of himself as a demigod. But most shocking of all, he fought as a gladiator. Though he rarely risked his life, his opponents were forced to yield. The Emperor of Rome, debasing himself in the arena, horrified the Senate. He slaughtered animals by the hundreds and staged hunts where he struck down beasts from raised platforms, delighting in the crowd's applause. His vanity knew no limits. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus, and rechristened the months after his titles. He demanded that the Senate worship him as a living god. Paranoia deepened. Executions and purges thinned the Senate. By the end, Commodus trusted no one. On New Year's Eve of 192 CE, conspirators finally struck. A wrestler strangled the emperor in his bath. His death ended the Antonine dynasty and hurled Rome into chaos. 193 CE was a year of anarchy. Pertinax, a respected senator, was chosen to succeed Commodus. He tried to impose discipline, cutting luxuries for the Praetorian Guard. They turned on him, stabbing him to death in the palace after just 86 days. In a shocking display, the Guard then auctioned the empire. The wealthy senator Didius Julianus bid the highest, promising each guardsman a fortune. The Roman Empire, once a republic of laws, now a monarchy of soldiers, was literally sold to the highest bidder. The provinces erupted in fury. 3 generals declared themselves emperor. Their armies marched toward Rome. The victor was Septimius Severus, commander of the Danubian legions. He swept into Rome, executed Julianus, and bought the loyalty of the Praetorians. The Severan dynasty was born. Septimius Severus ruled with the army as his base of power. He lavished money on soldiers, increased their pay, and allowed them to marry legally. The Senate became little more than decoration. Enrich the soldiers and scorn all others, he advised his sons. It was the new formula for rule. After his death in 211 CE, his sons Caracalla and Geta inherited the throne jointly. But fraternal rivalry ended in blood. Caracalla had Geta murdered in their mother's arms, then ordered thousands of his supporters executed. Caracalla was brutal, but he made one of the most sweeping reforms in Roman history. In 212 CE, he issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to all freemen across the empire. Once a privilege of the few, citizenship was now universal. This swelled the tax rolls, but also symbolically united Rome's vast peoples under one law. Caracalla was assassinated in 217 CE by his own guards while campaigning in the east. What followed were eccentric and disastrous rulers. Elagabalus, a teenage priest from Syria, shocked Rome with his devotion to the sun god Elagabal. He replaced Jupiter with his foreign deity, staged bizarre rituals, and flaunted scandalous marriages to both women and men. His disregard for Roman tradition enraged the Senate and the people. After 4 chaotic years, soldiers dragged him through the streets and killed him. His cousin Alexander Severus attempted to restore stability. He reformed administration, improved law, and sought to compromise with the Senate. But when he tried to buy off invading Germans rather than fight, his troops mutinied and murdered him in 235 CE. His death ended the Severan dynasty and unleashed a storm. The half-century after 235 CE nearly destroyed the empire. Invasions battered every frontier. The Goths sailed across the Black Sea, sacking Greek cities and reaching as far as Anatolia. The Alemanni and Franks stormed into Gaul and Spain, even threatening Italy itself. In the east, the powerful Sassanid Persians under Shapur I swept into Syria, sacking Antioch and humiliating Roman armies. In 260 CE, Rome suffered its most crushing disgrace. Emperor Valerian marched east to confront the Persians. Instead, he was defeated and captured alive. Persian rock reliefs show Shapur on horseback, with Valerian kneeling before him. Roman sources claim the emperor was used as a human footstool, then flayed and stuffed as a trophy. Never before had the ruler of Rome endured such humiliation. Meanwhile, the empire fractured. In the west, Britain, Gaul, and Spain broke away as the Gallic Empire. In the east, the wealthy caravan city of Palmyra rose under Queen Zenobia, who seized Egypt and Syria, dreaming of a new Eastern Empire. Plague ravaged the population. Cities shrank, fields lay empty, and famine spread. Coinage was debased until Roman money was little more than scrap metal. Inflation soared. Worst of all, emperors rose and fell in dizzying succession. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors were proclaimed, most assassinated within months. Ancient writers described Rome as ruled not by law, but by the sword. Among the empire's rivals, none captured the imagination like Zenobia. Fluent in Greek, Aramaic, and Egyptian, she styled herself as a new Cleopatra. Under her rule, Palmyra grew from a trading hub into the center of a new power. Her armies marched into Asia Minor, and her fleets controlled the eastern Mediterranean. For a moment, Rome's eastern provinces slipped permanently from imperial control. Zenobia minted coins in her name, declared herself empress, and built a court of Hellenistic splendor. To many, she seemed a ruler destined to carve out an empire of her own. But her ambition would be checked by Rome's recovery under a soldier of iron will. Aurelian. Amid the chaos, one emperor deserves credit. Gallienus ruled for 15 years, astonishing longevity in this age. He reformed the army, creating a mobile cavalry reserve that could respond rapidly to barbarian raids. He elevated capable commanders regardless of birth, ending the Senate's hold on high command. Though he could not stop secessions in Gaul and Palmyra, Gallienus preserved the empire's core. His persistence kept Rome alive long enough for true recovery to emerge. Out of the chaos rose one of Rome's greatest soldier emperors. Aurelian. Born of humble origins, hardened by a lifetime of war, Aurelian seized power in 270 CE. In just 5 years, he restored the empire's unity. He crushed the Goths, drove back the Vandals, and smashed the Alemanni in northern Italy. Turning east, he confronted Zenobia, defeating her armies at Emesa and Palmyra. Zenobia was captured and paraded through Rome in golden chains. Her dream of empire ended. Then Aurelian marched west, reconquering the Gallic Empire. For these victories he earned the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Aurelian also fortified Rome itself. The Aurelian walls, stretching 12 miles around the capital, signaled that even the Eternal City was no longer immune to invasion. He introduced economic reforms, stabilized coinage, and promoted the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as a unifying state religion. Some historians see in this a foreshadowing of Rome's later turn to Christianity. Yet his reign was short. In 275 CE, he was assassinated in a conspiracy of his officers. The empire was left once more adrift. But for the first time in decades, it had hope. For ordinary Romans, the 3rd century was a nightmare. Farmers abandoned lands near frontiers, retreating behind city walls. Trade collapsed, once bustling markets grew empty. Money lost value, forcing barter to return. Plague cut down families indiscriminately. Inscriptions from the time show children buried in shocking numbers. Famine stalked provinces where armies requisitioned food. Religious faith shifted. Traditional gods seemed powerless against disaster. Eastern cults of Mithras and Isis flourished. Christianity, still persecuted, spread quietly, offering hope of eternal life to a weary population. By the late 3rd century, Rome remained vast but shaken. The Senate was powerless, emperors ruled at the mercy of their armies, and provinces flirted with independence. And yet, the empire survived. The crisis of the 3rd century revealed both Rome's fragility and its resilience. Against plague, invasion, rebellion, and economic collapse, the empire bent, but did not break. But survival came at a cost. The Rome of Augustus and Marcus Aurelius was gone. In its place stood a harder, militarized empire, one that would require radical reform to endure. In the next chapter, a new ruler would impose order on chaos. By the late 3rd century, the Roman Empire had survived its greatest trial. Invasions, plague, economic breakdown, and endless assassinations had nearly torn it apart. Yet against all odds, the empire endured. In 284 CE, a soldier of obscure birth rose to power. A man who would reshape Rome so profoundly that nothing would ever be the same. His name was Diocletian. Born in Dalmatia to humble origins, Diocletian rose through the army by discipline and ability. Practical, tough, and clear-eyed, he saw that the empire could no longer be governed like in the days of Augustus. It was too vast, too threatened, too unstable. His answer was the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. In 293 CE, he divided authority among 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, the Khazars. Diocletian ruled from Nicomedia in Asia Minor. Maximian, his co-Augustus, governed the west from Milan. The junior emperors ruled from Trier in Gaul and Sirmium in the Balkans. Rome itself, once the heart of empire, was now largely ceremonial. The empire's capitals were closer to the frontiers, where decisions mattered most. This system promised stability. With 4 rulers, each frontier had a defender. Clear lines of succession reduced the risk of civil war. The emperors reinforced their authority with elaborate ceremony. They dressed in jeweled robes, wore crowns, and expected subjects to prostrate before them. No longer were they merely first among equals. They were near divine monarchs, set apart from ordinary mortals. Diocletian reorganized administration, splitting provinces into smaller units for tighter control. He expanded the bureaucracy, creating layers of officials to ensure taxes and supplies reached the army. He also restructured the military. Border garrisons were supported by mobile field armies stationed inland, able to move quickly where threats arose. The empire was no longer reactive but strategically flexible. Economically, Diocletian attempted to halt runaway inflation. In 301 CE, he issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing costs for goods and services across the empire. Though often ignored and impossible to enforce everywhere, it was the boldest attempt yet to stabilize Rome's economy. Taxation, too, was regularized. Land and population were assessed in new censuses, tying obligations directly to the needs of the army. This brought predictability, but also greater burdens for farmers and landowners. Many peasants, unable to move freely, found themselves bound to their land. An early step toward medieval serfdom. In religion, Diocletian was a traditionalist. Alarmed by the rapid growth of Christianity, which rejected Rome's gods and imperial cult, he sought to purge it. In 303 CE, he launched the Great Persecution. Churches were torn down, scriptures burned, bishops imprisoned. In some regions, like North Africa, Christians were forced to hand over sacred texts or face execution. In others, such as Egypt, entire communities were decimated. Martyrdom stories spread quickly. The soldier George of Cappadocia, later Saint George, was executed for refusing to sacrifice to pagan gods. In Nicomedia, Christians were burned alive. Yet far from destroying the faith, the persecution strengthened it. Martyrs were venerated as heroes, and underground networks kept communities alive. By the time Diocletian retired, Christianity had proven unbreakable. The attempt to eradicate it had only made it stronger. In 305 CE, exhausted by illness, Diocletian did something unprecedented. He abdicated voluntarily. He and Maximian stepped down together, passing power to their Caesars, Galerius and Constantius. Diocletian retired to his palace in Dalmatia, a vast seaside complex that survives today as the core of the Croatian city of Split. When urged to return to power, he refused, saying he preferred to grow cabbages in peace. But without his authority, the tetrarchy collapsed into rivalry. Civil wars erupted, generals clashed. Out of this storm emerged a man who would change the empire's destiny forever. Constantine. Constantine was the son of Constantius, one of Diocletian's Caesars. When Constantius died in 306 CE, his troops in Britain proclaimed Constantine emperor. But he faced rivals across the empire, Maxentius in Italy, Licinius in the east, and others in between. For years, civil wars raged. Constantine's most famous test came at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. Facing Maxentius outside Rome, Constantine reportedly saw a vision, a cross of light in the sky, with the words, "In this sign you will conquer." He adopted the Chi-Rho, the Christian symbol, on his soldiers' shields. His victory was decisive. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber, and Constantine entered Rome in triumph. The next year, he and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, granting freedom of worship across the empire. For the first time, Christians could practice openly without fear. Constantine's struggle for power was not over. Licinius, his ally, became his enemy. Their rivalry culminated in 324 CE at the Battle of Chrysopolis. Constantine's forces crushed Licinius, leaving him sole ruler of the Roman world. Constantine's propaganda portrayed him as chosen by the Christian god, yet he was pragmatic. For years, coins still bore images of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, alongside Christian symbols. He was a bridge between old Rome and new. But his support for Christianity deepened. He funded the construction of great churches, including the original saint, Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. In 325 CE, he convened the Council of Nicaea, where bishops debated Christ's divinity. The resulting Nicene Creed became the cornerstone of Christian orthodoxy. Constantine's most enduring act was the creation of a new capital, Constantinople. On the site of Byzantium, he built a magnificent city of palaces, forums, baths, and churches. Its strategic position on the Bosporus-controlled trade routes between Europe and Asia, while its harbors made it a naval stronghold. The Hippodrome became its beating heart, filled with chariot races and festivals. Unlike Rome, burdened by pagan past and political unrest, Constantinople was a city of the future. Dedicated in 330 CE, it became the new Rome. For over 1,000 years after the fall of the West, Constantinople would stand as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. For ordinary Romans, the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine were both blessing and burden. Taxes grew heavier, with assessments tied to land and population. Many small farmers found themselves locked into hereditary obligations. Bureaucracy expanded, with officials monitoring everything from grain supplies to craft guilds. Freedom narrowed, but efficiency grew. The army became stronger, better supplied, and more professional. But its demands weighed heavily on society. Yet there was also stability. Roads were secure, cities flourished again, and Constantine's solidus, a new gold coin, brought monetary stability that endured for centuries. And for millions, Christianity offered new hope. It gave meaning beyond the empire, a universal faith that bound together rich and poor, Greek and Latin, soldier and civilian. Together, Diocletian and Constantine reshaped Rome beyond recognition. Diocletian had stabilized the empire after a century of chaos, creating structures that brought discipline and order. His attempt to destroy Christianity failed, but in doing so, he revealed its resilience. Constantine built upon that foundation. He turned persecution into privilege, aligning Rome with a faith that would shape Western civilization. He founded Constantinople, shifting the empire's heart eastward, ensuring survival even after the West fell. Rome was no longer the city of Augustus or Trajan. It was now an empire of monarchs, of Christians, of two capitals, Rome and Constantinople, balancing the weight of history and the pull of the future. For Romans of the 4th century, it seemed a new golden age had dawned. But challenges remained: barbarian migrations, internal divisions, and economic strains would test whether even Constantine's empire could endure. The long decline of the West was about to begin. By the mid-4th century, Rome still looked eternal. Constantine's reforms had restored order, Christianity was spreading across provinces, and Constantinople glittered as the new Rome. But the empire's strength was uneven. The East thrived with trade, cities, and wealth. The West, by contrast, was poorer, its cities shrinking, its armies reliant on foreign recruits. And beyond Rome's borders, entire nations were stirring. In 376 CE, tens of thousands of Goths, pressed by the sudden arrival of the Huns, crowded the banks of the Danube, begging Rome for asylum. Emperor Valens permitted them to cross, hoping to settle them as allies. But corruption destroyed the plan. Roman officials extorted the newcomers, demanding bribes and even selling them dog meat at extortionate prices. Starving and desperate, the Goths revolted. In 378 CE, Valens marched to confront them near Adrianople. Confident in victory, he attacked without waiting for reinforcements from the west. But the Goths, reinforced by cavalry, encircled the Roman army. The result was annihilation. 2/3 of the Roman force was slaughtered. Valens himself perished. His body never recovered. Ammianus Marcellinus, a historian of the age, compared the defeat to Cannae. A disaster Rome had not seen in centuries. The psychological impact was immense. For the first time, an emperor had fallen in battle against barbarians. Rome was no longer invincible. The Goths were eventually resettled inside the empire, not destroyed. Rome had no choice but to absorb them, a sign of things to come. After Adrianople, Theodosius I rose to power. A skilled general, he stabilized the empire by negotiating with the Goths, granting them land and status as federati, allies under their own chiefs, serving Rome in exchange for territory. This was practical, but dangerous. For the first time, large groups of armed barbarians lived within the empire, loyal to their own leaders as much as to Rome. Theodosius was also the most devoutly Christian emperor to date. In 380 CE, he declared Christianity the official religion of the empire, banning pagan sacrifices. The transformation begun under Constantine was now complete. Rome was no longer a pagan state, but a Christian one. When Theodosius died in 395 CE, he divided the empire permanently between his sons. Arcadius ruled the east from Constantinople, Honorius the west from Milan, later Ravenna. The east was rich, fortified, and cohesive. The west was weaker, exposed, and doomed to bear the brunt of invasions. Among the Gothic leaders who had fought for and against Rome was Alaric. Denied fair treatment, Alaric turned his army on Italy itself. He marched repeatedly into the peninsula, demanding land, recognition, and justice for his people. In 410 CE, his patience ended. The Eternal City, Rome itself, was besieged and fell. For 3 days, the Goths plundered. Churches were spared, but homes, temples, and treasures were looted. The shock was global. Rome had not been taken in 800 years, not since the Gauls burned it in 390 BCE. Saint Jerome in Bethlehem wrote, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" Though Alaric soon withdrew, the psychological wound was permanent. Rome was no longer unassailable. The sack of 410 was only the beginning. Across the west, barbarian kingdoms sprouted. The Vandals, after wandering from Spain, seized Carthage in 439 CE, cutting off Rome's vital grain supply. From Africa, they launched naval raids, turning the Mediterranean into their domain. The Franks and Burgundians took root in Gaul, while the Suebi carved out lands in Spain. The Visigoths, after Alaric's death, eventually settled in Gaul and Spain, creating their own kingdom. And from the east came a new terror: the Huns. The Huns, nomads from the steppes, had driven the Goths into Rome's lands. Now, under Attila, they became Europe's nightmare. Attila forged a vast confederation of tribes, demanding tribute from Rome and devastating the Balkans. His speed and ferocity earned him the name, the Scourge of God. In 451 CE, he invaded Gaul. At the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, a coalition of Romans and Visigoths under General Aetius checked his advance in a bloody stalemate. It was one of the last great victories of Roman arms. The next year, Attila invaded Italy, ravaging cities and approaching Rome itself. Legend says that Pope Leo I met him and persuaded him to withdraw. In truth, famine and disease weakened his forces. But the meeting cemented Leo's prestige and showed the shifting balance of authority. Emperors faltered, but bishops rose as protectors of Rome. When Attila died suddenly in 453 CE, his empire fragmented. But his invasions had revealed how vulnerable the West had become. Meanwhile, Western emperors dwindled into puppets. Honorius, ruling from the marshes of Ravenna, hid from crises. His successors fared little better. Real power lay in generals. Stilicho, of Vandal descent, defended Italy against Alaric. Aetius, called the last of the Romans, defeated Attila. Yet both were murdered by jealous emperors. With their deaths, Rome lost its last great defenders. By mid-century, generals like Ricimer, himself of barbarian blood, elevated and deposed emperors at will. Between 455 and 476 CE, the West saw more than a dozen emperors, many ruling only months. The imperial title became an empty shell. In 455 CE, disaster struck again. The Vandals sailed from North Africa and entered Rome. For 2 weeks, they stripped the city of wealth, carrying off treasures and captives. Unlike Alaric's sack, this one was merciless. From it comes the word vandalism. The city that once commanded the world now seemed helpless. Its provinces were gone, its armies unreliable, its emperors impotent. For ordinary Romans, the decline was not only political, but personal. Taxes rose even as protection faltered. Fields went untilled, trade networks broke down, and famine haunted the countryside. Cities shrank, their forums silent, their baths abandoned. With emperors powerless, local bishops became leaders, providing food, justice, and spiritual hope. Christianity gave meaning in an age of collapse, promising eternal salvation, even as Rome itself crumbled. By the 470s, the Western Empire was reduced to Italy and scraps of Gaul. In 475 CE, a boy named Romulus Augustulus was placed on the throne. His very name, Romulus, founder of Rome, and Augustus, its first emperor, seemed a cruel joke. In 476 CE, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed him without resistance. Odoacer did not bother claiming the purple. Instead, he declared himself King of Italy, sending the imperial regalia to Constantinople. The Senate informed the Eastern Emperor that a separate emperor was no longer needed. The Western Roman Empire was dead. And yet, Rome never truly vanished. The sackings of Rome horrified contemporaries, but they did not erase the empire's shadow. To later generations, the story of Rome's decline became a warning of the fragility of power, the impermanence of empires, and the inevitability of change. The Western Empire was gone, but Rome's spirit endured, in the East as Byzantium, in the Church as Christendom, and in the very idea of empire itself. In the years that followed, the West was carved into kingdoms. Visigoths ruled Spain and Gaul. Vandals controlled North Africa. Franks expanded in northern Gaul, and Ostrogoths would soon claim Italy itself. Though these rulers were barbarians, they adopted Roman law, administration, and often Christianity. In many ways, they did not seek to destroy Rome, but to inherit it. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE was not the fall of civilization, but it was the end of a world. The Western imperial office, once the most powerful in history, was gone. The Eternal City endured, but no longer as the seat of empire. Power had shifted eastward to Constantinople, and into the hands of kings who were Roman in name, but Germanic in blood. Rome, the empire, was finished. Rome, the idea, was only beginning its afterlife. Rome's laws outlived its emperors. The principles of Roman jurisprudence, contracts, citizenship, rights, and duties influenced medieval codes and later the great legal systems of Europe. Centuries later, the Justinian Code, compiled in Constantinople, preserved Roman law for future generations. Even today, echoes of Roman legal thought shape modern courts. Latin survived the fall. Though it fractured into regional dialects, it evolved into the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Even English carries hundreds of Latin roots. To speak these languages today is to carry the legacy of Rome on the tongue. Roman literature, too, endured. Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's poetry, Cicero's speeches, copied and studied by monks in the Middle Ages, shaped Western thought for centuries. Rome's stone monuments still stand. Aqueducts, amphitheaters, baths, and roads. They remind us of Rome's mastery of engineering and its vision of connecting a vast world. Medieval builders learned from Roman arches and domes. Renaissance architects revived Rome's grandeur. Even today, our capitals and courthouses echo Roman forms. Perhaps Rome's greatest legacy was Christianity. Once persecuted, the faith had become the empire's soul. After 476, the Catholic Church carried forward Rome's mantle. Bishops and popes inherited its authority. The Church preserved literacy, law, and tradition through the Middle Ages. The Pope in Rome became both spiritual leader and political force, a successor to the emperors in influence, if not in title. Rome's empire vanished, but the idea of Rome proved immortal. Medieval kings and emperors sought to claim its legacy. In 800 CE, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans. For centuries, the Holy Roman Empire claimed descent from the Caesars. Russia would later call itself the Third Rome. Even modern nations, from Britain to America, have looked to Rome as model and warning of power, order, and decline. Why does Rome still captivate us? Perhaps because it embodies both greatness and fragility. It shows how power can unite continents, build wonders, and shape cultures, and it warns how corruption, division, and external pressure can unravel even the mightiest empire. Rome reminds us that no empire is eternal, but that ideas can outlive empires. Its laws, languages, and faith shaped the medieval world and continue to shape ours. Its rise and fall remain a mirror for every civilization that has followed. The Western Roman Empire ended in 476 CE. But Rome itself never truly died. And so, we have journeyed across the centuries. From Augustus, who forged the empire out of civil war, to Romulus Augustulus, the boy whose abdication marked its end, we have witnessed Rome's triumphs, its monuments, its emperors both noble and infamous. We have seen its armies conquer, its cities flourish, and its borders collapse under the weight of time. But even in its fall, Rome left behind a legacy that still surrounds us. In the languages we speak, the laws we uphold, the architecture we admire, and the faiths we practice, Rome is gone, yet it lives on within us. Thank you for watching this long journey through history. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories from the ancient past. Your support helps us bring history to life. One empire, one civilization, one story at a time.